My name is Swapan Chaudhary. I'm the CEO of Deeplai, and it's my great honor to be here with Ignacio Moreno. Ignacio is an attorney specializing in EUDR and will help us here to address the legal aspects of the regulatory. Michael Proschek-Hauptmann is a sustainability expert who will help us here to have the view of the sustainability and see what is really important for all of us to get compliant. And we have Julius Frenzel, industrial process expert, which will help us to understand the traceability element and the importance of understanding where I am in the supply chain and why I need to have a good collaboration with all members in my entire supply chain, simply at the end to get compliant for every stakeholder. So many thanks for the experts who agreed to join us during this webinar. So EUDR readiness and efficient implementation. So the question is, why did we address our topic in this way? Because we are gathering information from the market that there is really a low awareness of what I need to do, how I need to act, where I am myself in the supply chain, and what obligations are on me. An efficient implementation is to make really all of you aware that being compliant with EUDR is a process, but nothing really to be afraid of. It's easy to get in. Simply, we need to have the right information and right understanding who we are and what is required from us. So I hope you will enjoy this session. And I wanted to begin to ask my colleagues here who are will be glad to answer the questions. So, as we know, everything begins at the forest, yeah, and that is the place where, by the EUDR regulatory, we got an operator. So the question is, why gathering data at the first level of the supply chain is so important, and it is the critical, and why the first DDS is really giving us a good the confidence that within the supply chain we'll be able to match the regulatory the compliance. Please, Michael, if you could be so kind and begin.
Yeah, thank you, Swapan. Thank you for inviting me. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Michael Proschek-Hauptmann. So I'm in my day job, I'm a compliance manager in a big Austrian sawmilling corporation, basically. And of course, I'm also engaged in the implementation of the EUDR currently. Why is like the basic information so crucial? So why do we need to have this this data from, let's say, the forest level in order to be able? So first, it's an obligation. It's now a clear obligation in the EUDR. You have to collect geolocations. But what is much more important is that the data collection is a key part of your due diligence system. So anybody who has been involved already in certification or similar systems, if you have already experience with EUDR, you know that the ground data, the information gathering is the basis to build your due diligence system on, basically, right? Based on this information gathering, you are then assessing your risk, and then you are mitigating your risk if you identify risks. And you need to see that this process is not a linear process, but it's a sort of an iterative process, right? So you're gathering information, you're assessing this, you're assessing the risk, you're taking mitigation measures, and then you're getting back and assess again whether you have now a negligible risk, because this is the requirement as a sort of a operator, or as a sort of a big trade. Let's put it the operator. You are requested to have this information. And everything what you are assessing concerning your risk is mostly linked to the forest itself and to the subsequent supply chain. So if the ground data is not really working, if you do not have the relevant data, you are not able to do a proper risk assessment. And this is why it is so crucial to have a sort of a good and basic data collection. For the collection itself, it's important that it's structured. So you should have a sort of an idea of what you're requesting from your suppliers in order to be also able then to have a structured risk assessment and risk mitigation strategy. Because just this, instead of a unified application of such a system, prevents then also you from falling into traps regarding, let's say, administrative topics in the implementation of the EUDR. Closing here, what is important also is, as mentioned, the process is not linear. It's a sort of a circular process. And in this process, it's always important to keep up the communication channels with your suppliers in order to be able to adapt and to ask back questions or to, let's say, increase probably also information content which you will need for your duties as EUDR compliance officers.
Many thanks. If Virius could comment on his experience about other industries and the traceability due diligence processes. So what's the experience? How can we adapt, the experience from other industries here in our EUDR compliance approach? Juris, you're on mute. So.
Sorry, hello. Yes, basically from an industrial process point, we talk about the traceability process. So every process should be, let's say, first step simplified. So what are the different tasks here? So as Michael mentioned, okay, the origin of the data, which is, let's say, product data, in our case, in the wood commodity, actually is not the wood itself, it's the first transaction. Because only with the first transaction, you have all the data which are belongs to that product. The product in this case is this transaction of wood. So basically, to compare it with other industry, this you have to get right, because otherwise the product has no identity to follow. On the way down, at this moment, also there's the decision already made if this product is compliant or not. So in the following steps, it's more about to pass the information of this product and to keep the information of that product, because if the product lose the information, this is the only way it can become incompliant.
Great. Many thanks. Ignacio, if you could comment, what is the legal, I mean, perspective here? Because we speak a lot about geolocation, yeah? And as we call it, the first mile and the gathering of information at the forest has further implications. So if you can just address that.
Yeah, the biggest legal concerns for operators might be who is responsible for the veracity of this data, because finally you are asking to your providers to send you some data, but they are not concerned by this directly by this regulation, because the regulation applies to operators that place on the market a product, but on the EU market. So if you have a provider for a third country, he is not responsible for any information that he gives you or for any potential non-compliance. So here the question is that the operator is the ultimately responsible, and he needs to verify and prove that the data is correct. If he provides incorrect details in their due diligence systems, that would constitute a breach of their obligations. So yes, I think that the biggest concern for operators is the responsibility, and the answer is that they must ensure that the information is real, and if they cannot ensure it, that means that they might be a big risk of non-compliance, and that they should be careful, because finally they are going to be subject maybe to competent authority checks. They are going to have further operators and traders further down the supply chain that they are going to check if they have exercised due diligence correctly, and if the information is not all the information, but if it's well done, and if it's real. And you will have other actors, maybe NGOs that are studying the practice in the third countries, that may have also relevant informations, and even competitors or other companies that are making the right thing. So yes, the implications is the responsibility for the ownership and the veracity of the data. And this is a very crucial aspect, because the operator is the responsible for this veracity.
Okay, great. Many thanks. So what I hear is a due diligence process with the appropriate risk assessment, risk mitigation, and the measures which need to be taken, but via every stakeholder of the supply chain. And here is, I think, the question which the customers are asking. So how should I address it? Yeah, how I should really make sure that my measures are justifiable in the process. If I can begin from you, Ignacio, what would you advise to these stakeholders, what they should do and how they should address the due diligence, risk assessment and mitigation processes?
Yes, here we enter in the topic that maybe there is some part of subjectivity, but for almost everything it's objective. There are some criteria that it established in the regulation. You have first the information requirements, that you have to gather the information, and then you have to assess it with Article 10 that they tell you how to assess it. So it should be, the problem here is that you could have some concepts as, for example, the negligible risk, that may be a little bit more subjective, that finally you have to assess the information you have gathered to prove or to know yourself if there is a risk of non-compliance. So it is very important to have good data that you have collected, that it's real, and then to be able to, with data of the third country, to be able to assess it and arrive to a conclusion of whether there is a product that is compliant or not. So finally, the work is done by the operator that places on the market, and he has to assess the data that he has collected to arrive to a conclusion.
Okay, great. So, Mikhail, if you could comment from your practice in many years in the sustainability of supply chains, what is the real life picture of the processes on risk assessment and risk mitigation?
Yeah, basically, what is one of the core topics is to have an honest approach to this, not to have not just a formal approach, but an honest approach. So you have to have your risk assessment should be a real one. You should really assess your risk that you get non-compliant material in your supply chain. What is, let's say, now different between the EUDR and the EUTR is basically, of course, like the scope of the operator and the involvement of big traders, which have basically also the same role as operators, this due diligence obligation. The operator under EUDR is no longer just an importer. Well, it's the first one who is putting a commodity, the wood, on the market, the European market, as it was with the EUTR. It is still the importer. It is still the one, also the forest owner, who is putting it the first time on the market, the European forest owner. But it's also the producer who is producing something out of the commodity wood. So each sawmiller basically is already also an operator, according to the definition of EUDR. So the scope of everything is massively increased, and there are much more, let's say, operations currently concerned on this topic. What is crucial is, so my experience is, to some people, this all sounds very odd and very complicated. It is not so much complicated, especially when you are in a low-risk environment. you could help yourself quite easily with setting up the process and then just collecting the basic information and passing this on to your supplier. The critical topic is really the topic of medium or standard risk and high risk countries, where you're also obliged from the regulation basically to run a due diligence system, which is more sophisticated. And one of the crucial topics in high risk countries is traceability. That means you, as an operator, you should be able to verify that the transaction was real. This sounds complicated. It's also not, right? You're not receiving delivery notes, but you should have on top of the delivery note, you should have additional traceability information, like by a code marked, let's say, load, or GPS coordinates, which you can verify, photo documentation, any sort of, let's say, due diligence information, traceability information, which you can then process internally and where you can easily check, okay, I received this delivery. I see this delivery was really coming from this place and it was received at that date in my own mill. So I'm managing this. This is, to my mind, this is one of the core elements of a due diligence system in a high risk country. Like what is enough in a low risk country is the delivery note and the basic information. So it will be easy, but for the high risk countries within Europe also, it will be exactly this. And for outside Europe, Ignacio already said basically everything. So the operator, the importer, has the obligation to get all the information. That means you need to go down and get the information from the harvesting plot. If you're purchasing material in Africa or in South America, you need to know where it is exactly coming from. But if you're familiar with, let's say, certification with controlled wood or controlled sources programs, then you know that this was already an obligation from there. And you just need to adapt it a bit and, let's say, probably also automate some of the processes in order for you to limit the effort.
Okay, great. And here to continue, Julius, I would have additional question to you related to other industries to give us a little bit insights. So how other industries, which are very, very, I would say, experienced in traceability of different products, how did they secure the process that, the justification of the risk assessments, as well as the capability of a downstream audit can be provided?
Yes, I would say that from a process point of view, I would say that as we have here different risk assessments or risk levels, where we have to collect different levels of data, a system, because you have to go to an automated process, need to be able to adapt to these different requirements, because otherwise you will not get the data that you need. But if you look at your process, you have to be very clear if you are in your process, if you're mixing up, let's say, sources from different risk levels. So in this point, I would always put the level on the highest risk level for all the supplies, because to have two, say, different processes going into one process is a very complex situation and potentially have a lot of cause a lot of problems or mistakes, which can be quite, let's say, impacting in further steps. So have a look how is your process from the different origins. If you have different process streams, okay, you adapt different streams. If they all go in one stream, the best case is to adapt to the highest needed level.
Okay, great. Many thanks. Just wanted to inform the audience. We have here a Q&A button. So if anyone has a question, you can place his question, and when we'll get to the end of the discussion, we will look and we'll happily answer all your questions. Good. So now when we're moving and understanding more about the processes, yeah. My question, I can begin with you, Julius. So how do we understand the responsibility of an operator in the supply chain? Because obviously, as you said, there can be more complex supply chains, yeah? There can be within EU, there can be imports to EU. We see also cases where there are exports of veneer from EU to a third country outside of EU, and then import of a ready-made product. So the complexity of supply chains depends obviously on a case, but how the stakeholders, because one supply chain will have multiple operators, so how they should understand their responsibility.
Yeah, as we already said, it's all about the origin or first transaction. Yeah, because if the first transaction is okay, then the wood is compliant. Doesn't matter how far it goes down the downstream process. So even if you, let's say, in a best case scenario, if all your origins, even you will have multiple, are okay, you are fine. Yeah. So the question is always, how good is your information about this first mile? Because in the downstream, because this is where the proof of compliance in the downstream is more about to, let's say, to avoid that you get any mix of non-compliant wood into your supply chain. So, and there again, it's better your first transaction is documented, also in maybe terms of logical parameters. The more difficult it is for somebody to mix non-compliant wood into this, let's say, in this supply chain. So basically, you can easily say, okay, if I have the first mile right, then I have more or less to check the other stakeholders if they are, let's say, work compliant, meaning that they are not cheating about mixing other wood in their supply chain.
Good. Thanks. So to move to Michael, we can I think make a general statement that the mixing of compliant and non-compliant materials within a supply chain is the key issue. So if you can, based on your experience and give some insights here, what are the recommendations really for the stakeholders to address this question? And also, if you could comment on the obligation of segregation of a non-compliant delivery. Michael, please.
Mute.
You're on mute, Michael.
Yeah, probably let's start with the latter one, the segregation of non-compliant materials. So basically, I think it's Article 23, which is foreseeing, let's say, the measures which should be taken in order to remedy non-compliant input. And this can lead up to, let's say, the dumping of the material. The problem is, once it's mixed in and you cannot, let's say, distinguish anymore where this non-compliant material, where the non-compliant wood was, this is infecting all and affecting basically all resulting products. We will see, let's say, this is one of the topics which is not yet addressed appropriately also from the Commission. I think there needs to be a clear clarification how to deal with this, because for all operations, this would theoretically mean anybody who is mixing in the production different origins is then obliged to dump all the outgoing material, which is an economic disaster, right? So this is one thing. But what you have to consider, and what is much more important, is that EUDR requires you not just to take a corrective action regarding the non-compliant material which you received, so probably to take it back, to take it out if you can, but also to communicate this down in your supply chain, right? And this can be very harmful to your business, right? Because what is your customer doing with this information? He would then be theoretically also obliged to put away the material. So you see, this is a very tricky topic. It will be up to the Commission also to give clear indications, because also it's written that the measure should be proportionate and appropriate. So we will see also how the courts in Europe, in the diverse regions of Europe, will interpret this in the end. But this is currently at the table. So this, of course, raises the obligations, or let's say the pressure to have a very robust due diligence system in front. Because if you do not have non-compliant input, you don't also have the problem of segregation. This is the answer to the first question. The second question was about the risk of mixing. This is a very individual risk, right? You can, let's say, it's depending on, let's say, the production. It's depending on the country. Probably sometimes it's depending on local harvesting techniques or practices. So you have to assess this very concretely. And again, in a high-risk environment, everything which is related to traceability is helpful. So where you have traceability with the GPS coordinates, with routes, with, let's say, documentation of a takeover of a load, this does not necessarily be very sophisticated, right? You can just have a photo documentation and GPS coordinates from the loading and from the downloading, and you compare these pictures, and then you have already a proof, which is already, I would say, a very solid one at the beginning. This is one thing. And the second thing is, of course, we discussed, this is the topic of the inventories, right? So you also have the possibility, and you should audit your suppliers in the after run. If this is necessary, so on-site audits, or let's say desk-based audits, are one of the key mitigation measures which you can apply. And here also to get figures on inventories, for instance, and to compare them with the reality is also something which is currently not very common in the auditing process, but which will get another sort of momentum in the whole discussion of the implementation of the EUDR.
Okay, good. Many thanks. I think we're moving now to discuss and explain more about the legality part. So Ignacio, if you can comment, because under EUTR, as it was mentioned, the legality obligation was already there since years. Now it is transformed into EUDR, yeah? So the element of mixing, let's say, non-compliant, timber, it's addressed, I would say, again in the EUDR, but I believe under more strict rules and requirements. Can you make a comment, please?
Yes, here we have to take into account that EUTR was only for legality purpose. They didn't talk about deforestation. Here we have more requirements. You have to be sure that your timber was produced legally, but also that it's deforestation free. And here enters the question, as Michael said, the risk of mitigation, the risk of mixing or circumvention, that is so important, because you could have all the documentation from your plot of land, from the producers, and everything could be okay. But if you are in a high-risk country, you have to always ask your question in the due diligence system, that is, if there is any risk of mixing. So you could have all the documentations that the producer is compliant and everything, but if you cannot answer to the question, what is the risk of mixing, currently you should not place on the market that product after mitigating the risk. So you should do an audit or something on your producer to be sure. So yes, here we see that it's very important the moment of production of the timber, okay? Because as you say, it's very different, the EUTR and the EUDR, okay, towards the deforestation. But sometimes you are going to apply one regulation and sometimes you are going to apply another, depending on the time of production of the timber. Okay, so it's very important to understand this entry into application of the EUDR and this repeal that it's transitorial also of the EUTR. So I think that it's another topic that should be discussed like calmly, because you should be very aware. Another crucial aspect is to know exactly the time of production or harvest of the timber, okay? Because that it's necessary to know if you apply one regulation or the other.
Okay, great. And I think slowly we're moving to a next, topic, which we're having on the list, and it is being asked by a number of customers. So I've got already my inventory, yeah. So I'm now moving to EUDR, yeah. So how I should treat my inventory, which I'm having here, which I don't have the data, which is required by EUDR. So what shall I do?
That's a good question, because you have to take it into account that the EUDR doesn't apply retroactively to the products. Okay, so if timber is harvested before the entry into force of the EUDR regulation, you don't apply EUDR, you apply EUTR. But there is a time specific that until 2027, the EUDR is going to apply to products that are produced before the entry into force. Okay, but after 2027 and 2027, the repeal of EUTR, it's absolute and it's the end of EUTR, okay? So you have to take into account that if, for example, an operator places on the market now timber, they are not required to comply with EUDR yet, because it has not entered into application, because the application of the EUDR is in the 31st December 2024, okay? So what happens if then another operator that places on the market another product after the entry into application of the EUDR that uses the commodity that was placed now in the market, what happens? Because maybe a big operator, a large operator that needs to check the due diligence of the previous operators that places on the market the commodity, now we have that they cannot check that because they were not obliged to do it. Okay, the Commission has said that in that case, you should only be able to gather the information to prove that the commodity was placed on the market before the entry into application, okay? Because they are not gonna tell you to exercise due diligence on operators' supply chains when they were not required to do it, because it's a question also of privacy of the data. You cannot enter to all the data to exercise due diligence on their behalf. So yes, the solution, I think it's logic from the Commission that it's if the previous operator was not required to comply with EUDR, you should prove that it's in that time range in which EUDR was not yet in application, where the commodity was placed into the market. Okay, and there are other casuistics that it's also that could also arrive. Because the micro and small enterprises undertakings has 6 months more of a transitional period to adapt. So a question arises, that is, what happens if a micro or a small undertaking places on the market a commodity after 2024? They are not obliged to comply with the regulation yet, but then if another large company buys this commodity to create a new product, maybe they need to check the due diligence system of the first one. So it's a little bit tricky, and it's a question that might be solved by the Commission in the next FAQs.
Yeah. Okay. Many thanks. Okay. I see here a few questions which we'll address at the end. I also see a hand rise. In our setup, we're requesting everybody to ask the question, which we'll address. So please, if you have any point, please transform it into a question in the tab. So now when we understand this more, I think we need also to address the point of what can we expect from the competent authorities, yeah? And let's begin here, Ignacio, with you, and then move to the colleagues. So we can reach that there is already a fixed level of transaction audits. So low risk 1%, standard risk 3%, high risk is 9%. Yeah, and the competent authority of a country obviously needs to get involved. But it's not only the competent authority of the country; it's a cross-border competent authority audit can happen as well. So when we look at the numbers, they seem that they will be really huge, and we can expect the audits from the competent authorities. Can you just comment on that?
Yes, the competent authorities finally they are gonna ask you for a specific transaction, your due diligence system that proves that you have all the information requirements, that you have assessed the risk, and in your assessment there was no risk. Okay, and if it was a risk, they are gonna want to see your mitigation measures. So I don't feel they are gonna make audits in third countries, as maybe you say, because their job is to see if you have assessed the risk and mitigate it with your own audits. Okay, so they are gonna check if there is a risk of non-compliance, because finally you could evaluate all your information and arrive to a conclusion saying that there is no risk, but the competent authority would check that and would check the reasons why you arrived to this conclusion. So they will check if your assessment is well done, and if they consider that there was a risk of non-compliance, they will tell you that you should have done adopt mitigation measures, and in case you didn't do it, they have the administrative procedures to implement or adopt interim measures, corrective measures in case you have done something wrong. They are going to check and audit your due diligence system and all your products and everything, but they are not going to go outside there. They are not going to go to other countries to verify. They are going to verify all the information and everything, but the audit in third countries is the operator's work. Okay, if they don't do it, the competent authority should check on that to see if it was all done correctly.
Okay, good. So now if we could get insights from Julius and his experience in other industries, yeah, where audits are standard in a traceability, system. So what are the approaches which are being used in other industries, which could be as well adopted here in our industry under EUDR? You're on mute, Julius.
You have this kind of, let's say, audits or checks in different industries. I would say that here in the industry is more like planned things. Yeah. So here I see that it can be quite a lot. Yeah. So if you are faced with potential checks and audits, you should have this thought about in your system that you can easily provide the data information for the audit process. Yeah? Because as well that you can easily show your setup, because this will also prove your credibility. Yeah? And that can bring the efforts and let's say also additional cost quite down. Yeah.
So as we can see, basically it is a top-down, I would say, initiative activity, because obviously at the end, when the producer is placing a product to the retail, one of his key obligations is go through the audit process downstream and make sure that his supply chain is compliant with whatever regulations are within his industry, right?
Yeah, and I would say here that the challenge is this, that you can expect that if you make an audit from, let's say, back to the roots, it can affect a lot of first mile transactions. Yeah. So this is where the, let's say, the number of data and information come into the game. If you don't have that, let's say, built into your system or in your stream, that can be quite a difficult task.
Especially that under EUDR, you need to have the documentation for 5 years for a possible the audit. So a process in a system within a supply chain is obviously a must. Otherwise, it will be difficult to address a potential audit of a transaction, right?
Yeah, I would say that, think about it, that it's easy that at one point you will end up with hundreds of origins for the same, let's say, product you process. Yeah? And then if you have to prove, you have to show how you checked for all these 100 origins. Yeah? So without the system, it might become a bit difficult, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, good. So, Michael, if you can comment from your experience, the requirement really that you need to have the process under control, you need to have the measures in the company, and actually from the real life, you need really a closed loop system which will enable you to do the right risk assessments, risk mitigation, and decisions. Yeah, basically with whom or who in the future will be your supplier, or maybe maybe not, because he didn't comply with your internal company procedures, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And I mean, this is something which is probably underestimated currently. In the end, we have different roles of the different sizes of the companies, like be it traders, be it operators. Everybody knows that small operators are partly exempt from the due diligence obligations. We know also that small traders are. We know that big traders are now in. So there's a variety of different actors for different activities for which they have, again, different obligations, right? And the result of this sort of, let's say, jungle, I call it jungle, is basically that the big players on the market will dictate basically what will be requested, and they will set the standard. This will be the reality, and this will affect everybody. So everybody is well advised to really look into its supply chain, to set up the system accordingly, and to be able then to collect the respective information. Because if the obligation to forward, for instance, due diligence information is not in the EUDR, it will be in your contracts. This is for sure, right? This is one thing. And the second thing I want to mention here is, again, on the authorities. So we have now a set of different competent authorities, and we know that in the whole of Europe, in the practical implementation of the EUTR, there was a big topic that the different competent authorities are applying different standards. Like there was even, let's say, the rumor that some of the companies are moving their import businesses into countries where the authorities are less strict, right? So this will no longer work this way, because if you are sourcing from, if you're importing now, let's say, material into Europe, and you're going via one of the Baltic states or whatever, and you're producing wood product, furniture, for instance, which is then further distributed by an Austrian trader or by a German trader, it will be the Austrians and the German competent authorities which will check exactly these transactions. This is so important to know, that your due diligence system in the future will be checked also not just by the competent authority of your country, but of any other country, any other European Union country, right? And this means, okay, you have to have a sort of, let's say, a common and a joint standard, and it would be advisable if the Commission would go forward. I mean, they are doing something here on at least giving a deforestation benchmarking, but within Europe, this is not really a problem. This is something probably helpful for the imports, but for the intra-European trade, it will not be so much of a relevance, right? So practically, you see, these are two factors which will increase the standards. And this is why it is so important that you go with a unified system, that you go with a clear structure, and that you are able to show to anybody, no matter whether it's the competent authority from a Spanish region, or whether it's the competent authority of Sweden who is checking your transaction, that you're able to show basically all the related documentation and have it in one place. And thereby, of course, you can manage this also manually, but this is quite an effort. Everything that you can automate in this respect is of high value, I would say, right?
Yeah. Okay, many thanks. And when I have you here, we'll slowly move to questions. So there is a question. Third country is a country of origin outside EU. I understand that the geolocation origin is irrespective of the country. We need the geolocation or the origin, and if obviously the operator is the importer, so he is responsible to check, let's say, in the countries, I would say, outside of EU of origin, the source of the product, yeah? Or you understand it differently, or can you comment, please, Michael?
Yeah, so the geolocation obligation is a global obligation. It's concerning like wood and all the other commodities which are covered by the EUDR. And the third country, as it was now mentioned in our discussion, is a country which is outside the European Union. And why is this so important? The obligation is just on the European Union operators, companies, right? So EUDR is something which is obliging basically the importers and the wood processors and the wood traders within Europe. This needs to be seen, right? The companies outside Europe are not obliged. They can just be obliged contractually, and this is the topic here, right? I hope this was clear.
Yeah,
from the...
yeah. And the other question, which is I think related, and we didn't address this topic, but I think will be good if we can make the comment. So a transaction which is being done by an operator according to the definition of the EUDR needs to be registered in a EU system with a due diligence statement. Yeah. So to make that I mean clear from, let's say, our perspective, I can make a comment that every company who is an operator needs to register in the system, have an account to process the due diligence statements. It can do it on its own, so access the system and manually do it, or use the technologies available on the market, which are using API connectivity and creating this processes automatically, which obviously is a huge help in case of multiple transactions, even per day. Yeah. So to here the question is related to a third party which is outside of EU. Once again, if you could make a comment and emphasize what are the obligation or what needs to be done on their side in able to support the importer to get compliant. Michael, if you could.
So what can the operator do in order
what the third party which is outside of EU?
So what can they do
to support the operator to get compliant?
So if you're based outside the European Union, it is basically recommendable to set up your due diligence system as if you would be like within the European Union. Of course, you do not have here transaction numbers and transactions, so you do not need to issue a due diligence statement. You are not obliged to do this, but in order to collect all this information, you should probably do this in a structured way in order to be able to answer the questions and the information requirements of your European customer. So this is basically how you can help this and how you could do this physically, or let's say practically. Most of the companies are currently looking for, let's say, solutions, of course, which are helping them in order to get the information directly. There's a huge, there's a huge resistance from the forest owners to register forest plots. But in the end, this is the only thing they have to do, right? They have to register their forest plots and have to indicate which sort of volumes they want to produce there, and then put this information further. There's no other. The big thing is starting with the first process sizes. So the poor guys, if you want it like this, are the sawmills, if I may say so. Are the sawmills and the first processes which are already dealing with the wood, because they need to not just process the wood, they also need to get an evidence and have an evidence of the origins of the wood, and to let's say collect this information in a structured way in order to be able to forward this then, right? With databases, this is not a miracle, to be honest. This is not a miracle. It can be done also with not too much of an effort, but of course what makes the topic difficult is if everybody is coming with different systems, there is no transaction standard currently involved. So if you're a bigger operator outside the European Union, it is also recommended that you put your standards on your suppliers. In terms of standard, I mean the information requirements which you're asking them to deliver. And then you're already doing quite something in order to support the information needs of your European customers.
Thank you very much. There is another question which I would like to ask Ignacio to make a comment, because this is rather a statement than a question, but let me read it. With the deadline approaching, many countries and organizations are asking to postpone the EUDR, especially as there are so many questions still need to be addressed, and the FAQs being published. What do you think is going to happen?
I don't think. I don't think the EUDR is gonna apply later. Like, that is not a possibility, nor I think it should be. I think that there has been like 18 months to do things calmly, and I think that it's still plenty of time to do it, but a little bit more stressed. But I think that there is still time to comply with the regulation, and also we have to take into account that we talk about it before, that it's going to be a lot of products or commodities that are placed on the market before the entry into application of the regulation. So at first, the first months of the regulation, a lot of products, you only will have to prove that it was placed on the market before the entry into application. So I think that it also counts like a transitional period for undertakings to adapt to the regulation. And the first stages is not going to be so difficult, this due diligence system, but yes, I don't think they are gonna do it later or anything.
Okay, great. Many thanks. So here is a question: if this webinar will be available? Yes, it is. It is recorded. It will be published on YouTube, our internal YouTube, and we shall send every attendee a link that he can get the access to it. Yeah. Let me move to a next. I mean, points till we have some time. Yeah. So I began at our discussion that we're having a number of questions when we're facing a complexity of a supply chain. Yeah. And when there can be materials moved from Europe to a third country outside of EU, and then with the mix with other materials produced a product and again exported to EU. Yes, it is complex, and here on the complexity and on the importance to map the entire supply chain in order to have the good understanding what are the obligations of the stakeholders of the supply chain, I personally believe is crucial. If you could, each of you, and I'll begin with Ignacio, just comment, yes, we have simple supply chains and we have a very complex supply chain. So how do we deal with the complexity?
Yes, I think the regulation is clear, and I think it's easy to understand but difficult to accept. And it's that if you cannot grant that there is not a risk of mixing or circumvention, or there is any other type of risk, you cannot place on the market that product. So you have to be really aware about the complexity of your supply chain. And always in your due diligence system, you are going to ask yourself this type of risk. So if you cannot answer with no, there is no risk of mixing because you have studied your supply chain, you should not place on the market this product unless you can mitigate this risk. But the complexity of the supply chain is proportionate to the risk of mitigation. That there is a risk, it doesn't mean that the product is uncompliant. It means that you have to mitigate that risk. So we don't have to be frightened if there is, only because of the fact that there is a risk, but you should mitigate it. And if it's possible to mitigate it, you can place on the market this product. But yes, for sure, the complexity is a very important topic.
Good. Michael, if you could comment from your experience on the complex supply chains and what really is important to have in mind. You're on mute, Michael.
Sorry. Yeah. So as Ignacio said, so the obligation is clear. In a high-risk environment, you should know your supply chain. But this is it. And if you know it, you can mitigate risks. If you don't know it, you have complete unclarity and you cannot put it on the market. So this is easy, right? Like practically, what does this mean? A complexity increases in the supply chain, of course, always depending again on the product which is produced, on the production process, on the different sorts of wood which are probably used in order to produce one piece of furniture, on, let's say, the multiple sources which are used in order to produce one piece of wooden product. Let's say if we think about particle boards or if we think about OSB boards, this is something which can have multiple different origins in there, right? The obligation is still clear. If you are the operator, you need to have the geolocations, you need to have due diligence in place in order to prove this, right? So there is no, I would say there is no one solution fits all approach to this. You need to really assess your specific situation. In many cases, I think it will not be too complicated, because mostly then the chains within the timber industry are then not extremely long, right? They just get complicated when you have then composed products, of course, so it can happen also in this case. But as mentioned, if you have a system in place, when you show to the authorities, look, this is how I collect my information, this is where I get it from, this is how I verify this information. And you do not need to verify each and every piecemeal, right? Like in a sort of, let's say, risk mitigation process, it's enough to have a reasonable approach to audit, for instance, the implementation of the material, and then to put corrective action forwards, to discuss with the supplier, okay, this, if you didn't keep this one regulation which we put on you, you need to correct this. This will be for sure enough if you are in a medium, also in a high risk environment. In a high risk environment, of course, the threshold will be higher, right? So we'll have more critical situations, and then you really have to show, okay, the authorities will ask you, okay, but is there a corruption risk? How do you address the corruption risk in this situation, right? And then you need to have the answers. The important thing is you need to have the answers ready, right? And the data is giving you the answers, and the management system is giving you the answers. And this is then also how you can cope with let's say, this sort of instrument such as EUDR, which is, I understand, for somebody who was not involved in too much into EUDR or into certificate, might look really, really complex. And I would not say it is not, right? But it is doable, to be honest, right?
Yeah. And just me to add, I mean to it. Obviously, if we're dealing with a material which is already certified as FSC certified, BFC certified, obviously this is one of the mitigation measures we're taking. Yeah, it's basically we're choosing a supplier which already went through a certification. I mean process. Yeah, which still doesn't mean that any mix on the way can happen, but that is very, very important to be said. Yeah, that yes, there already are processes in place, especially on the certification part, which need to be considered as one of the options to choose a supplier. Yeah, but still you need to do your risk assessments and risk mitigations in your process. Yeah, is that correct?
So what I can add on this is both certification systems, like the most the broadest one, like the FSC and the PFC, have now also seen that they have to adapt to the requirements from EUDR in order to keep their relevance, and they are doing right. So they are creating their own claims on EUDR compliance, EUDR check. And this is really something which you can consider and which you can work with, right? Because unlike until now, let's say in the certification, you had two categories of wood: the certified material and the controlled material. Controlled sources or controlled wood, as it's called by the systems, but the concept was always the same. The one is coming with a closed chain of custody. The other one has to be fed into an existing chain of custody and has to have additional due diligence measures. Now, both certification systems are changing this approach because they are now putting the due diligence as a basic requirement for all the material which is going through the chain of custodies. And this, of course, was the right step. And this will help you also as companies if you look into this, if you deal with this, because they are already coming with sort of prefabricated due diligence systems, which you are probably already acquainted with, which you can then also use, and then you can also give on to your customer, right? So I can just recommend it to you also to look into this. If not at the level of the forests, at least at the level of the supply of the certifications of the chain of custodies, this would be an added value, I guess.
Thank you. So I would like really to thank my guests to take their time and share their knowledge. in the regard of the EUDR. We all recognize that yes, not much time left, and we also observe on the market that now companies are getting more involved and concerned. So we'll continue here in our approach in reaching out to you and helping in understanding what are the obligations. We also recognize that there are a lot of specific cases, so please feel free to reach out to us, ask any questions. We'll be happy to support you in the way we can, and looking forward to see you. I believe in a short time you'll see a number of messages which are related to the EUDR will be addressed, and we really want to help each of you to get compliant and enter the journey with a smile at the end and say, "Oh, now I know what to do," and it is really not so hectic as I was thinking at the beginning. So once again, many thanks to my guests, many thanks to the audience that they found the time and interest in the EUDR, and yeah, all the best and see you soon. Thank you. Goodbye.